Feixiao's light cones. Which ones are best for her? I've done the damage tests and using the right light cone can help her deal phenomenal damage and the wrong one, much less. And is his signature light cone better or worse than her E1 or even her E2? You might be surprised by my damage test results, so keep watching. It's David Wowee. How you going? Let's get to it, shall we? Feixiao is a wind element unit belonging to the path of the hunt. Her strengths come from her single target attacks and follow-up attacks. She's a powerful but thankfully pretty straightforward character, so when it comes to light cones, you want ones that increase her critical rate, critical damage, and her follow-up attack damage. And if you're greedy, a light cone that can lower enemy defense. One light cone that may be recommended to you is Only Silence Remains. As a 4-star light cone, you'd get the most benefits by getting it to S5. At S5, it increases the attack of its wearer by 32%. If there are 2 or fewer enemies on the field, it also increases the wearer's crit rate by 24%. This light cone serves Feixiao pretty well in that it increases both her crit rate and her attack. The twist is that you will only get the crit rate bonus if there are 2 or fewer enemies in the field, which really limits you in many battles. So how much damage can Feixiao do with this light cone? When it comes to damage calculations in Honkai Star Rail, there are so many variables such as team comps, the builds of each team member, who you're fighting, and which mode you're fighting in. So when it comes to the numbers I'm presenting, use them as a rough guide, man. What's probably more useful is the damage difference between each light cone I present. To calculate damage, I use the following team using Asagi's fantastic damage calculator. I've linked to the calculator and my specific setup in the description of this video. With my setup, an S5 Only Silence Remains had Feixiao dealing about 3.132 million damage, which isn't bad for a 4-star light cone. The trick with getting this light cone is that it is a gacha light cone which you can randomly get from any banner pool, so if you don't have it yet, it's never guaranteed. But don't you worry if you don't have it, there are plenty better ones to come. If you want a free light cone, the 4-star Final Victor light cone may be useful as you save up for a 5-star one. At S5, Final Victor increases the wearer's attack by 20%. When the wearer lands a crit hit on enemies, they will gain a stack of good fortune. This effect can be stacked 4 times. Every stack of good fortune the wearer has will increase their crit damage by 12%. Good fortune will be removed at the end of the wearer's turn. For a 4-star free light cone, Final Victor is pretty decent as it buffs up Feixiao in all the right spots. It boosts her attack, and if you land a crit hit, your crit damage will also increase. But what's missing here is that crit rate boost we really want, which you may be able to increase with Feixiao's relics or through team members anyway. So what damage are we looking at? With my setup, an S5 Final Victor has Feixiao dealing about 3.21 million damage, which is okay for a free 4-star light cone. You can get Final Victor from the Forgotten Hall store and as rewards from the following places listed here from the Honkai Star Rail wiki. Screenshot this for future reference. The next light cone is another gacha light cone. This one is Sailor's signature 5-star light cone called In the Night. At S1, it increases the wearer's crit rate by 18%. While the wearer is in battle, for every 10 speed that exceeds 100, the damage of the wearer's basic attack and skill is increased by 6%, and the crit damage of their ultimate is increased by 12%. This effect can stack up to 6 times. This is another good light cone in that it increases Feixiao's crit rate, attack, skill, and crit damage. However, there's a catch in that you need to build Feixiao's speed for it to work properly. To get a higher speed means you'll have to get relics that prioritize increasing her speed instead of other stats like crit rate and damage, which for some can be more important for a more powerful Feixiao. This is probably most useful if you want to build Feixiao up as some kind of speed freak. This light cone kind of forces you to do that anyway, but if you're looking for sheer power, there are more effective light cones for her. What kind of damage are we looking at? At S1 with my setup, we've got Feixiao dealing 3.76 million damage, which is a decent step up from Only Silence Remains. The thing is, this light cone isn't easy to get. It's only available in limited banner runs. So far it has only appeared twice. The next decent light cone is yet another gacha light cone called Swordplay. It's a 4-star light cone and it's a little easier to get than In the Night. At S5, for each time the wearer hits the same target, damage dealt increases by 16%, stacking up to 5 times. This effect will be dispelled when the wearer changes targets. This is an ultra straightforward and effective light cone that works well with Feixiao's single target specialty. Basically, the more times she hits a target, the more damage she does. What kind of damage? At S5, with my setup, we have Feixiao dealing about 3.6 million damage, which is slightly less than in the Knight's damage. You can randomly get the Swordplay light cone through any character or event warp, so hopefully you can get it to S5 over time. If you've had it with Gacha light cones, Cruising in the Stellar Sea is a free 5-star light cone that if you get it to S5 can actually be decent as it suits Feixiao pretty well. At S5, it increases the wearer's crit rate by 16% and increases their crit rate against enemies with HP less than or equal to 50% by an extra 16%. When the wearer defeats an enemy, their attack is increased by 40% for 2 turns. What does this actually mean? Firstly, this light cone gives Feixiao a crit rate buff, which is what we want, and when she starts really damaging those enemies to less than or 50% HP, her crit rate further increases. Not only that, this light cone rewards Feixiao by boosting her attack whenever she beats an enemy. The drawback, of course, is that you need to make sure that Feixiao is the one beating the enemies and dealing most of the damage. But if your team is built to support her as the main damage dealer, this shouldn't be too much of a problem. What kind of damage are we looking at? In my setup, we've got an S5 Cruising in the Stellar Sea dealing about 3.356 million damage, which is less than Swordplay and in the Night, but is still decent, especially for a free light cone. You can get Cruising in the Stellar Sea for free from Hunt.The store. For significant impact, you should probably get Cruising in the Stellar Sea to S5, which you can do so by using superimposers, also from Hunt.The store. Another commonly recommended light cone is Worrisome Blissful, and it's clear why. At S1, it increases the wearer's crit rate by 18% and their follow-up attack's damage by 30%. After the wearer uses a follow-up attack, apply the tame state to the target, stacking up to 2 stacks. When allies hit enemy targets under the tame state, every tame stack increases the crit damage dealt by 12%. This light cone ticks all the right boxes by increasing the wearer's crit rate and follow-up attacks, which are 2 things that make Feixiao great. Not only that, the tame state makes anyone in your team who attacks the affected enemy deal more damage. That's a win for everybody, except for the enemy. So how much damage exactly? With my setup, at S1, we get Feixiao dealing a whopping 4.321 million damage, which is significantly more than the other light cones mentioned in this guide so far. But of course, there's a catch. This is Topaz signature light cone, so firstly, you can only get it through Gacha during a Topaz banner run, and secondly, if you've got it equipped to your Topaz and you're in the same team, then you'll need a different light cone for Feixiao. By now, you've probably noticed a pattern. All of the best Gacha light cones for Feixiao seem to be character-specific light cones, and it's going to continue. Next, we have Dr. Ratio's signature light cone, Baptism of Pure Thought. At S1, it increases the wearer's crit damage by 20%. For every debuff on the enemy target, the wearer's crit damage dealt against this target increases by 8%, stacking up to 3 times. When using ultimate to attack the enemy target, the wearer receives the Disputation effect, which increases damage dealt by 36% and enables their follow-up attacks to ignore 24% of the target's defense. This effect lasts for 2 turns. This is a really good light cone for Feixiao. It increases her crit damage, and during her ultimate, her follow-up attacks ignore a percentage of enemy defense, which is perfect because in an ideal world, you'll frequently use Feixiao's ultimate. Feixiao will deal even more damage the more debuffs the enemy has on them. So what damage are we looking at? At S1, we're looking at a sweet 4.2 million damage. The challenge, of course, with getting this light cone is you could only have gotten it during Dr. Ratio's limited banner release. Next up to Baptism of Pure Thought is none other than Feixiao's signature light cone I venture forth to hunt. At S1, it increases the wearer's crit rate by 15%. When the wearer launches a follow-up attack, gains 1 stack of Lumen Flux to a max of 2 stacks. Each stack of Lumen Flux enables the ultimate damage dealt by the wearer to ignore 27% of the target's defense. When the wearer's turn ends, it removes 1 stack of Lumen Flux. It looks so simple, but it's so good. Wait until you see my damage test results. since it's Feixiao's signature light cone, it clearly does everything we want a Feixiao light cone to do. First up, we've got the crit rate buff, which, interestingly enough, gives a slightly lower crit rate buff than Baptism of Pure Thought and In the Night. But that doesn't matter because the beauty comes from the 2 stacks of defense ignore you place on the enemy with this light cone. Compare this with the buffs and debuffs of your team, and you've got yourself a Feixiao to be reckoned with. And here's the proof. Let's look at the damage. In my setup at S1, Feixiao's signature light cone, I venture forth to hunt, helps her deal 4.461 million damage, which is a bit higher than Baptism of Pure Thought. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you're feeling generous, donate a thanks or become a super member to support this small but growing channel. Huge shout out to my current super members. Is Feixiao stronger as an E1, or is he stronger with a signature light cone at S1? Using Asagi's damage test calculator, I use my team of Moza, Robin, and Aventurine. In my scenario, with an E0 Feixiao equipped with a signature light cone, I venture forth to hunt. She deals about 4.46 million damage, but if we get an E1 Feixiao and give her a free S5 light cone, cruising the Stellar Sea deals only about 3.355 million damage. So if you're torn between an E1 Feixiao or an S1 Feixiao, you may want to stick with an S1 Feixiao. How about an E2 Feixiao though? Things are dramatically different because in my scenario, we have an E2 Feixiao dealing 5.476 million damage, which is 1 million more damage than her E1 using a standard free light cone. So an E2 Feixiao beats an E0 with S1 Feixiao. If you're greedy, why not just get an E2 S1 Feixiao, man? Or if you're super greedy and super rich, why not get an E6 and S5 Feixiao? Give me some money, please. So what light cone should you choose for Feixiao? Obviously, her signature light cone, I venture forth to hunt, is her best one. And if you have a limited Stellar Jade budget, having her light cone could actually help her deal even more damage than if you had her at E1. But if you have a bit more budget than that, you could aim to get her E2. If you don't know what I mean by E1 and E2 and all that crap, or if you don't know how the game's pity system works to get exactly who you want, check out my guides in my description. But you don't need Feixiao's light cone to survive. You can expect some damage with free 4-star light cone Final Victor, and the other free light cone cruising in the Stellar Sea can be decent. And if you were lucky enough to get Dr. Ratio's light cone, Baptism of Pure Thought, and don't mind sharing it with Feixiao, you're going to be okay. But as an interesting note, if you check out my Jiao Chou light cone guide, you'll see that a Jiao Chou team equipped with Acheron can actually deal significantly more damage than Feixiao team that's optimized as I have here.